So, Daniel, this week Bernie Sanders was at did a town hall on Fox News. He was also at a town hall in Iowa. He was, I guess, pressed in the Fox News debate, or I guess town hall. It sounded like a debate because Martha McCallum really wanted to engage him, which was good. But she was saying, what are you going to do about these facilities that are overflowing down at the border? And his response was, I'm going to build better facilities or bigger facilities. And then sort of, parlayed that into a comprehensive immigration reform, I guess, pitch on some level. He did something somewhat similar in Iowa at a town hall, didn't he?
Yeah, well, in terms of the Fox News town hall, I think we need more clarity on what Bernie was talking about in terms of building proper facilities at the border. As much as I've been critical about towards Bernie's immigration program and rhetoric, it doesn't sound like he was actually arguing for any sort of like statutory change that would extend migrant detention. So that's an important caveat. My problem with what he said at the Fox News town hall is basically, well, first, what he did right. He emphasized the conditions of what he said, quote, violence and misery that Central American migrants are fleeing. And also, very importantly, that a failure to confront climate change is definitely going to force enormous numbers of people to migrate. And for those of us who believe in migrant rights, the corollary to the freedom of movement is the freedom to stay put if you want. And everything from war to neoliberalism to very much climate change violates people's right to stay put if they choose. So that was good. But his proposed solutions were underwhelming. They included a standard.
Well, wait a second. Before we get to Bernie's underwhelming responses, let's just talk about the generic, center left to left. I mean, Donald Trump, it seems to me, is really bringing some real clarity to the immigration debate from the right. And that is, we don't like immigrants. We particularly don't like immigrants of color. We don't like asylum seekers. We don't like people who are already here legally under an asylum program. We don't want these people here. We're afraid of the loss of our culture and whatnot. So what is the equivalent on the center left or left?
Well, the center-left liberal case for immigration is what's known as comprehensive immigration reform, which is what Bernie said that he supported in the Fox News forum debate, whatever that was. And what that means historically is basically a bipartisan compromise, a trade-off between what those of us on the immigrant rights left want, which is the legalization of undocumented immigrants in this country, combining that to try to win over conservative and Republican votes with increased enforcement, border militarization, and a guest worker program for business. The thing is, that approach has been a devastating entire failure from George W. Bush through Obama. They tried and tried and tried. And guess what? The right wing of the Republican Party is emphatically and unchangeably hostile to any legalization. Most of them, the right won't even support the DREAM Act, which would provide legal status to young people, immigrants who came to this country as very small children, which is like the lowest hanging fruit imaginable. So
right, these are people. We should be clear that many, the vast majority of these, some of them are now adults, but have never been to their home country. They don't speak the language of their home country. They have grown up in many instances, just believing they're Americans and have, these are people with more than spotless records, of achievement. And so this is, like you say, that's the low hanging fruit. But let me just stop you here before we go. Why has it been such a failure? I understand that it's because the conservatives are just adamant about how much they hate immigrants. But there's also this sort of quality to it of our proposal is a compromise. But
yeah, exactly.
That's problematic, isn't it? Because if you start with a compromise, there's nowhere for the people you're compromising with to go.
It's emblematic of everything. That's the problem with the establishment liberal approach to governance. Just look at healthcare, where you compromise where you open the negotiations with your compromise rather than your ideal. And so the only place to compromise is to move further to the right. And so all of these comprehensive immigration reform legislative efforts under Bush and Obama already incorporated just draconian enforcement measures, and still that didn't win the Republican nativist right over. And so what did George W. Bush, a Republican president and supposed immigration moderate, do? What did Barack Obama, a supposed liberal Democrat and immigration liberal, do? They both when their comprehensive immigration reform efforts, as those failed, they took independent executive action to crack down on immigrants on their own, to try to win credibility with a nativist right, to try to placate them and say, look, we're serious about enforcement. We're deporting the hell out of immigrants. We're militarizing the border. And guess what? The nativist right was like, great, we're still not legalizing undocumented immigrants because we don't like undocumented immigrants. We don't really like immigrants who aren't from, Northwestern Europe, basically.
Right. I mean, we have seen assault on perfectly legal immigration. We have seen a restriction on those things that would allow for legal immigration, like a narrowing of what the asylum laws are, et cetera, et cetera. And as you say, every time there has been a president that, like you say, imposes draconian crackdowns on immigrants, and Barack Obama deported a record number at certain points during his administration. The right wing in this country just says, okay, thank you for putting it on the table. We're going to put that in our pocket, and now we'll start negotiating again. Now that we've pocketed all the stuff that you thought was going to bring you some type of goodwill. All right. So with that said, now that we've established this notion,
and we're still going to run against you as soft on border security, amnesty-loving, softy liberals, even after you gave us all of these draconian border enforcement and deportation measures.
But isn't that part of the problem? Because Barack Obama could not advertise. To the extent that the left was aware, and I mean the broad left, right? I mean Democrats, broadly speaking. To the extent that Democrats were aware of Barack Obama's record on immigration, they're far more aware of it now, it seems to me, than during real time, because the Obama administration was trying to play this game where they were hoping that the right would see what they were doing and appreciate it, but they didn't want to advertise it too much to the left. And again, I'm using very sort of broad swaths of the population here. They didn't want to advertise it too much to the left because they would get in trouble with their base, right? I mean, Jay Johnson went down to Latin America at one point, was, sort of advertising the idea that there's detention up here, and they didn't do family separation, but they did have detention. They were looking in many respects. It wasn't until the last couple of years of the administration where they sort of abandoned this idea of we're going to be the toughest on immigration as a way of building our bona fides, but they couldn't advertise it. So there was no sort of conventional wisdom that the Obama administration was so bad on immigration, or good from the right's perspective. And so they couldn't run on it either. All right. Well, listen, we got to take a quick break. When we come back, let's talk about where Bernie Sanders should be, and frankly, where the left should be, because the Democrats need a proposal and they need some broad principles in which to guide them. And this is a way that people can assess whether their candidate is positioned properly when it comes to immigration. We're going to take a quick break. I'll be right back with Daniel Denvir right after this. Sam Seder, Ring of Fire Radio.